All right, guys, we are going to talk about verbs. All my classes are watching this video. Main focus is verbs. There are action verbs like stroll. Somebody takes a stroll somewhere. Snicker. Growl. Here. There are a lot of action words. We usually can identify all of the action verbs, but there are also some state of being verbs that I've had you guys working on pretty much since the beginning of the year, where we were talking about how we use them incorrectly. Like we'll say, I'll be sleepy. That is not correct use of this. It's I am sleepy or I'm sleepy, not I be sleepy, which is how many people would say that. So I want to just review with you guys action verbs, state of being verbs, and then if you look down here, I have the helping verbs as well. So we know that the state of being verbs, say them with me. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Let's say them one more time. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. You gotta be able to identify those just like that, because when we see them in a sentence, we got to be able to identify that those are verbs. So let's say them one more time. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. So make sure you're very familiar with your state of being verbs. 7th grade, you know that we are diagramming sentences. One of the parts of diagramming a sentence is being able to know what goes on that right side as our verb. And a lot of times where we mess up is if one of these is the verb. Okay, now we also have helping verbs. If you notice, I drew an arrow over here. That means that state of being verbs can also be considered helping verbs. She is walking to the store. Is now becomes a helping verb. Yes, it is a state of being verb, but now it is helping walking. Okay, so just because it's a state of being verb doesn't mean it's not a helping verb. We were strolling through the park. Were strolling. I had been hearing. Look at that. Had been hearing. All of those go together. Okay. So we got the state of being verbs. We've got the action verbs. And let's look at the additional helping verbs. Have, has, had. Do, does, did. Shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. We need to be familiar with those so that when we see them, we automatically know those are verbs. They might be helping verbs or they might be state of being verbs, but they're still verbs. Let's go through the helping verbs. Say them with me. Have, has, had. Do, does, did. Shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. All right, let's try it again. Helping verbs. Have, has, had. Do, does, did. Shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. All right, I'm going to ask y'all that so you make sure you go over it. Let's do it one more time. Ready? Have, has, had. Do, does, did. Shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. Okay, so make sure you practice those. Challenge your parents. Say it with them. Get them involved. So we know we have action verbs. Those are pretty easy to identify most of the time. We know we have state of being verbs. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Every time I say it in the video, if you say it, it'll cement it in your mind. And then we have our additional helping verbs because remember, state of being verbs are helping verbs. Have, has, had. Do, does, did. Shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. Okay, so let's make sure we practice those. Now, outside of just being familiar with what verbs are, we also need to be able to identify them specifically inside of a sentence. So I'm going to start in the middle with that green sentence right there. And that green sentence says, the wind whistled around the house and through the trees. Now, we have talked about subjects and predicates. Remember, the subject part of the sentence tells who or what the sentence is about. Okay? The subject part of a sentence tells who or what the sentence is about. The predicate part of the sentence tells us what, who, or what they're doing. Okay? So if it's the dog ran across the street, the dog is the subject of the sentence. What did he do? Ran across the street. That would be the predicate part of the sentence. So let's look at number 1. It says the wind whistled around the house and through the trees. All right? I want to be able to identify the predicate part of this sentence and the subject part of this sentence. Now, let me say this. What makes it a little bit easier is if I can go to the sentence and identify the verb immediately. So let's look at this. The wind whistled around the house and through the trees. What's the verb in this sentence? Hopefully you said whistled. The verb is whistled. Y'all know we double underline verbs. The verb is whistled, so that must be, that's generally where my predicate part of my sentence begins. So I can divide this right here. Y'all remember us doing the vertical line? I can divide it right there. The wind is the subject. This is the subject part of the sentence, okay? The predicate part is whistled around the house and through the trees. This is the predicate part of my sentence. All the rest of this. What did the wind do? The wind whistled. Now, I know y'all would try to tell me around and through and all of that stuff is a verb, but it is not. Remember, the is a what? Hopefully you said it was an article. And I'm not going to dissect the whole thing. We should know that house is a noun. We should also know that wind is a noun. We should also know that trees are nouns. We should know that and is a conjunction. We should know there's another article. We'll put article. We should know around is a preposition. It tells the position. Where did it go? It went around. Through, preposition. I lied. I apologize. I did do the entire sentence. But these are things that we have done. Verbs being one of our 8 parts of speech. I just went over several other parts of speech. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2 says, I was home all last night. I want to be able to identify the subject of the sentence, and I want to be able to identify the predicate of the sentence. So when I look at this, I was home all night. Remember, I told you, it's a little bit easier sometimes if you find the verb first. So when we look at the sentence, I was home all last night, prayerfully, you've been able to identify the verb is was. Was is a helping state of being verb. Also can be considered a helping verb. In this case, it's not helping anything else, so it would just be a state of being verb. Okay? So when I get ready to find my subject and my predicate or get ready to break up my sentence, here I have it. I is my subject. Well, what was I doing? Was home all last night. That is the predicate part of the sentence. Okay? So I have broken that down. I'm not going to dissect this one and go through all the parts of the speech, but you do need to know all 8 parts of speech. We've talked about all of them. So that is something you can Google and go back and look at that again. Now let's look at the red sentence I have at the top. It says the Atlantic has been crossed by a woman for the first time. First of all, I'm going to point this out because Taylor should be watching this video as well. Atlantic is a noun. It is a proper noun because it is talking about a specific body of water. This is talking about the Atlantic Ocean. They didn't say the Atlantic Ocean has been crossed. They said the Atlantic. But this is talking about the Atlantic Ocean. It is a proper noun. We got to be able to identify those. Proper nouns means it's a specific something. It's not just the store, it's Walmart. It's not just a car, it's a Toyota. Okay? It's not just a state, it's North Carolina. Okay? North Carolina would also be considered a compound noun, a compound proper noun, because it is two words that give us that. Just reviewing some stuff that we have talked about. So now let's look. It says the Atlantic has been crossed by a woman for the first time. I want to know what the verb is in that sentence. I'm going to give y'all a few minutes. Read over it again. And now let's go and get it. The Atlantic has been crossed by a woman for the first time. Hopefully you were able to identify that has been crossed is the verb. If I find my verb first, then generally I can finish up I can do anything else with the sentence. Has been. Where do I see has been? Has is right here. There is been. Put them together. They are helping verbs along with crossed. Okay? So if I wanted to separate this sentence with subject and predicate, the subject part of the sentence is going to be the Atlantic. So I would put my vertical line right here. I have the Atlantic has been crossed by a woman for the first time. So this is the subject part of my sentence. This is the predicate part of my sentence. Now the specific subject is Atlantic. The specific predicate is has been crossed. What happened to the Atlantic? It has been crossed. Okay? So I want you guys to watch this video a couple of times. Make sure that you get familiar with your different types of verbs. I know that you guys are pretty good with the action verbs, but before we go, let's go ahead. Let's say the state of being verbs. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Say it again. Teach it to your parents. Let's go. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been. Now let's go down here to the helping verbs. Please do not forget that your state of being verbs are also helping verbs. Helping verbs. Have, has, had, do, does, did, shall, will, should, would, may, might, must, can, could. Okay? So make sure you guys practice those. Challenge your parents. Tell your parents that you need help with it and for them to learn it with you. Ask them to go back and watch the video with you again so that you can master that. Okay? And then one last thing I just want to make sure I review, that the subject is whatever the sentence is talking about. Whatever the main idea of that sentence is, that's the subject. And then whatever that subject is doing, that is the predicate part of your sentence. Most of the time, the subject comes first and then the predicate. But it is not like that all the time. Okay? All right, guys. Make sure you practice this. Watch this video several times.